All right, so we're going to try this again. uh, I started a couple of series for introductory CSS, and to be honest, they had no direction. I wasn't happy with the way they came out, and basically, so I'm just going to start over again, and we're going to see where this one goes. Hopefully, it does better than the last one. So what we're going to do is basically we're going to go from, you know, introductory CSS up to hopefully Sass and mix-ins and some of the cooler new things that are coming out. All right, and so what we're going to do right now, just to get started up, we've got an index file which basically has a little bit of markup on it, and then we're linked to a style sheet in the CSS folder inside the root. All right, and so we've got a container class, which is the outer here, and basically that's just going to put something in the middle that's 600 pixels by 600 pixels with a gray background, centered. Okay, so the margin 0 auto will center the item within the parent element. In this case, the parent element is the body. All right, and so if we look at where we are, you'll see that we have this gap up at the top between the container, which is inheriting its padding and margin from the body. And so what we can look at here, and this is something that, to understand the box model, this is the best way that I've seen to kind of explain it. Okay, so this is an example of the box model. If you see a highlight over everything, it gives you the corresponding sections above it. Okay, so this right here is your HTML element, which in this case we're starting off with, an H1 tag. Okay, the next item that's applied on top of the HTML element is going to be padding. If the HTML element is already inheriting class or inheriting styles from uh, its default settings, which all of them will, your padding will be added to that or subtracted from it, and it will mesh. Okay, so that's why it's always a good idea to flush all of the inherited padding and everything else. All right, so what we're going to work with here is the body, and when you add HTML elements to a style sheet, you don't need a identifier, you don't need a period or a pound sign, so it's not a class or an ID, it's an actual HTML element. All right, so we'll go through the H2 tags, or I'm sorry, the heading tags, H5 and H6. We'll do the paragraph tag, the div tag, um, some of the inherited ones, table row, table data, table header, table column. That's it for table, sorry. All right, and we'll add that, and what we'll do is we'll set a padding of 0 pixels and a margin of 0 pixels. All right, so now if we save that, go back, you'll see that everything is flush because there's no inherited padding from anything. All right, and so now really what we can do is kind of start to show how the box model works. Okay, so let's go back to the code, and basically what we're going to do is inside this H1 heading class, we have an H1 that says hello world. All right, that's pretty simple. All right, and what we're going to do is we're going to change the color of the text inside that H1. We're going to call it maroon, and we'll reload, and there's the maroon that's applied. So that now and this is actually, it had already been that way, but this is the HTML element that these styles are being affected on top of. So now if you look at the box model down here, the padding is next, right? So we got a padding, say 10 pixels, so we can make it visible. All right, so we save that, reload the page, and now you can see there's 10 pixels of padding, so that's 10 pixels on the top and on the left and the right and on the bottom. Okay, so now the next affected to that is the border. All right, and so we'll add a border. Border 3 pixels, solid black. Oops, 0, 0, 0. There we go. Save it, reload the page, and there's our border. Now, the H1 element stayed where it was. The padding stayed where it was because it isn't being affected by the border. However, when you add the next element, which is the margin, the border will be affected because, or it will not be affected because you're adding to it. But if you need to account for those if you're talking about the total width of that container. Okay, so that container is 600 by 600. If you're trying to fit elements inside of it and you have a 3 pixel border, 10 pixels of padding, and then another 10 pixels of margin, on each side you have to add those all up so that you're not overflowing into another div. Okay, and so that's important to take into account, and we'll look at that later when we start to lay out different positions on the page. So on top of the border, we're going to go to margin next. And it's a good idea when you start to lay out HTML classes like this that you take into account the hierarchy of the way things are. Add the padding first, add the border next, and then add the margin. All right, so we'll save that, and we'll go back and refresh. And you can see that it increased 10 pixels on each side and also increased the top and drove the container class down. Now that's expected because of the way that the container is not inheriting anything up here. Okay, its margin was set to 0, so it's 0 auto, so it doesn't have any margin attached to it. So it's going to push the whole thing down when the h1 tag is styled, or when that div is styled. Excuse me, the h1 underscore heading class is styled. All right. So these are the kinds of things that you want to account for as you're going through, you know, as you're going through and styling your pages. You want to pay attention to the way that one class will affect the display of another class. All right, and continually adding things to the flush line, which is the top line where I took all the padding and all the margins away, is a really good way of making sure that you don't have any inherited classes that are going to destroy other classes that you're custom adding later. Okay, so in the next episode we'll take a look at exactly how we can kind of lay out things in a similar style that are using the box model as a basis for creating a look, and I'll show you some examples of how we do that. All right. Well, thanks for watching. Hopefully this was fun and informative. And if it would really help me out if you go ahead and leave me a comment below or hit that like button. And stay tuned for the next one. Thanks again.